Hi, I'm Sarah. And today we are rating some Survivor gameplay. We're giving out dice to our players. But first, if you're new to this channel, please click subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. And then also say hello to Mike. Mike Bloom in the house.
Yes, happy to be here. I'm so sorry that Chantele couldn't make it. I hope, given the medical emergencies from this episode, that everything's going well gastrointestinally on all ends.
Yes, I hope she is not pulling a Carson. I hope she's not pulling a Matthew. We've had a few options this season.
It's okay if she's
Um,
pulling a Danny. That's just a natural bodily function that you happen to do in front of Jeff Probst sometimes.
but do you have to call out Jeff's attention?
Danny feels like the type that has to. He definitely feels like, I know he has a child, as we saw in those photos, but like when he was talking with me before the season, he talked about how his nieces and nephews were the ones to apply him for the show. So he kind of has that like crazy Uncle Danny
Yeah.
energy that makes me
Mhm.
feel like he would be the type of guy, right? To be like, hey, pull my finger. Hey, come on, I got a trick for you. And so I think it does make sense that so many people have talked about this being a once in a lifetime experience. Like, I don't know if Danny will be able to sleep at night in the firehouse knowing that there was a chance he could have showed off a fart to Jeff Probst and not taken that opportunity. You know,
Yes.
he's going to take a lot of opportunities in this episode, and maybe that was just the precursor to it.
Yes, but I also think the editors, like, it's not the first time in 44 seasons that someone has farted in a challenge, right?
Oh,
But
I
it
mean, just in general, yeah. But the thing is, he explicitly called it out. He was the one that's like, hey, gang, come around. I've got something to share. Which is perfect, Danny, but also to your point, how can you not put that in the show? I know certainly people are looking at like secret scenes this week and are saying like, why would he do showy Danny fart instead of this? Well, A was part of, this monolith of a challenge, which, is going to make the show no matter what. And B,
Mhm.
like, listen, Danny called attention to it. It has to happen.
I guess so. That's the producers and editors. I'd put it in. We got to keep it. So thank you, Danny. Thank you for that first. That is good. Now, before we dive into giving out our dice, we will not be able to speak about Brandon. He won't get rated, but I do have to ask you about him. You and I both learned in our exit interviews that maybe a miscommunication, that like maybe the vote was going to be split. I personally was like, this is really hard to believe. How did you feel about Brandon and his gameplay in this episode?
Yeah, Brandon is such an interesting cat in this way. I mean, first, talk about cat in terms of 9 lives. The idea that in a different world, this guy would have gone home on the third day. And maybe part
Mm.
of it was due to the idol that he had. But still, the fact that this guy technically was voted out on the first day were it not for this idol play. And now he gets done in by another one of these birdcage idols that he himself found is like really fantastic, ironic storytelling when it
Right.
comes to, his own gameplay. It's interesting because when we do this exit press, with both Sarah and myself and all the other people that do it out there, like we try to dig deeper under the surface to see like, okay, were there other things going on? And I was curious going into this episode, like, okay, how much is the rat too strong thing a thing? Because we have had such all over the wall votes the past couple episodes that we haven't really had an opportunity to say like, okay, let's see what the dynamics really are. From what Brandon seemed to tell us, that did indeed seem to be the case, that it was at least at this moment like Ratu versus everyone else. And then Brandon says, okay, we get to a certain point, then maybe I get rid of Kane. Maybe I go to the end with Danny and
Mhm.
Lauren. But when it comes to, like you said, apparently the idea that they were going to split the votes between Franny and Danny, because here comes Jam Jam. He's not going to reveal the entire plan to Brandon, but at least part of the plan to spread that seed. That Brandon said, okay, let's split the votes. And just there being such limited time or them shirking that limited time before they went to tribal council, it's tough. It feels like a first time player rookie mistake. What is interesting that I didn't realize until I had gone back over the numbers is that like the Josh, Matt, and Brandon tribal councils all happened on back to back to back days. Josh was day
Mm.
13, Matt was day 14, Brandon was day 15. And I feel like even in the new era, this is not something that we are necessarily getting. And I wonder if this is like one of those symptoms of that, right? This idea that
Mm.
the challenges, I've been out there to run a couple challenges. Like they start pretty early in the morning, but they can run into maybe the early afternoon. You add transit time onto that, plus the relatively early sunsets in Fiji. And sometimes you only have like mere hours to
Mm.
scramble. For Brandon's first tribal council that he went to, because of his unfortunate collapse in the opening immunity challenge, he had, I think, like 45 minutes, I think, with Ratu before they ended up going to tribal council. So it's
Wow.
tough to keep plans in motion. I don't know how the ball got dropped this big, though. I guess
Yeah.
it's a football analogy. Because, the other thing about it is that even Brandon admitted to us, like, this would have been a nice caution, but probably if the split vote plan was a thing, I don't think there's a chance that Jam Jam or Carson, at least one of them, doesn't vote with the Ratus, right? Because then in that case, okay, it really does require a plurality vote just in case. Because I would have to think, I guess the only thing that maybe could have saved Brandon is if all four of the Rat 2 people put their votes onto Franny. Because otherwise,
Mhm.
if you're like relying on the other people to put votes onto Danny, that feels a little sketch and then just incentivizes the others to jump ship. And if that is
Mhm.
the case, it would be like a 4-4 tie. And then in the revote, I still feel like Brandon goes. Like no matter
Right.
what, this was a 6-4 thing. Even if you split the votes, it was not going to necessarily save your bacon that much unless you somehow get everyone in a tizzy to get the vote split wrong. It felt like, obviously, maybe like an unchecked item on Brandon's list, but he seems relatively at peace with the idea that, like,
Yeah.
it didn't necessarily save him and wouldn't have at the end of the day. But yeah, to just like sum up, my past 3 minutes of blathering, I was surprised to hear that, not that a split vote plan was happening, but that it be decided to somehow become unanimous just because there was no communication about it. And I guess everyone thought, okay, I guess Franny. I haven't heard otherwise, so I'm going to jump on Franny. But then it's a little allayed by the fact that, okay, even if there was a split vote plan, the fact of the matter was the dynamics were essentially 6-4. And so, unless things worked out in a perfect way, it really wouldn't have mattered anyway. It would have just been set dressing.
Yeah. Okay. I guess if your history is something like 45 minutes before a tribal, maybe you feel comfortable with just like a check-in. This is the plan,
Yeah.
and then you move about your life. And instead of like in my head, I think we're constantly going back and circling back and checking at all times. I have a hard time believing we were all kumbaya around painting a flag and
Yeah.
and forget that we're playing the game.
It's weird because we haven't had a lot of vote splits going on. Again, that's by
Mhm.
proxy of the fact that we haven't had a lot of like big votes. The Josh vote was the last split vote and really only split vote that they did. And even that seemed relatively hectic. I mean, Brandon voted for Jam
Mhm.
Jam. Like he was one of the people that purposely split on Jam Jam, but like the question was, even then, remember they were scrambling us like, well, how many on Kane? How many on Jam Jam? Let's try to figure out what
Mhm.
the secondary is for in case Josh plays this idol that he definitely doesn't have. So this has kind of been, I think, the first test of this,
Mhm.
what they thought was this big contingency of, okay, let's try to set this up. And maybe it speaks towards how shaky that foundation was, that like they just assumed that they put something out there as soon as they were washing mud off themselves, walked out
Yeah.
of the ocean and said, okay, we're good. And they were not good at all.
Yep, that's it. That's the plan. Will happen because we have the numbers and all is well. Well, some people who are left in the game who are on that Ratu side might be losing some dice here from me today for that slappiness. So let's get started with Queen Carolyn. Look, she wasn't super running anything in this episode. I should remind everyone, obviously dice 1 through 5 is what we give out here, but I'm going to stick to my episode by episode.
Hmm.
Mike, you might do more of a season long. That is up to you. But for this episode, Carolyn still has her idol, hasn't had to use it. I loved the way that she voted. It felt like it was true to her and didn't appear to be just going along with anyone else she might be connected with. So I'm going to keep her where I've had her lately, which is at 4 dice. Might be slightly biased because I love her. So she has been up there, but 4 dice from me. How about you, Mike?
I mean, let the bias train continue. Let it keep rolling like Carolyn in that poor net as she's shrieking over and over again. Carolyn's a fantastic player. She's a great adapter to the circumstances while also playing into how she is perceived. It has just become so apparent. She vocalizes this in the beginning of the episode, right? She wants to be the turkey in the tribe, and they filmed this back in May. Thanksgiving ain't coming any too soon. You're not going to come after the turkey right now. Nobody really takes her seriously, it seems. It's working really well for her at the moment. And I think, to spoil a bit of like my opinions for, you know, the rest of the Three Stooges, I think they were by far the biggest winners out of all this, besides maybe Franny, who, you know, avoids getting her torch snuffed here, is the Brandon in the situation. Just because I think all three of them were able to play the middle so well, still obfuscate like their sort of expertise and strategic sense in the game. I think people realized that they were in the middle, but I think it's very impressive that like they knew they were in the middle, but also it's not like, okay, well now we need to take care of them. Hey, Ratu Soka thing can wait. Let's take care of these Tikas for now. That between their perceptions and maybe just some of their social relationships, they're not playing themselves up as like, okay, we're the big decision makers here. And part of that is also because of what they do in this vote, which is scattering to the winds a bit. And we'll get into it. I do think that each one of these three did do something well with their own individual vote. As you allude to, Carolyn is the one of the Three Stooges to jump over with Soka and vote out Brandon. This works really well for her for a couple of reasons. A, it's able to satisfy this personal narrative that I'm not even sure she still had out there, but for us, of the bro down summit that happened, right? Of like, well, you just sat there and ignored me the entire time. So like, let me be the one to bid you adieu. Works really well in a final tribal council situation. Plus, if there is this prevailing narrative, which will factor into my rating, of Carolyn is Jam Jam's follower, then here at least she's saying, no, this is a move I made, quote, on my own. Jam Jam voted this way. I voted this way, which I think is something she could put distinctly in her column, considering that, again, she has played this entire game with Jam Jam, and it's going to be tough to find those moments of distinction. I guess the Josh vote, not the vote against Josh, but the one that got out Sarah when Jam Jam voted Josh, could be a good example of that. So when it comes to these rating systems, for me, I usually start at one end of the scale, either like a 1 or 5, and then work in depending on like, okay, do the strong people have weaknesses? Do the weak people have strengths in terms of a strategic perspective? So Carolyn, of course, starts at a 5 because of the position that she's in. But I can't help but hit her a little bit due to, I know there's a lot of game to go. You know, we just had day 15, as I talked about. We're going through these eliminations alarmingly. We still have 11 days left. We're at the final 9 right now. But I'm beginning to worry about how long it's going to take for the worm to turn with the perception of Carolyn. I know that Marianne, they just saw this happen. And honestly, I'm surprised they're not more cognizant of it after that Marianne thing of like, oh my God. And we saw it personally with a bit of Gabler as well, even though I don't think he was like perceived as a goat out there by his cast members. It seems like, you know, I'm looking at a couple of spare statements like Brandon saying when I mentioned before of, okay, we got to bring in Jam Jam because Carolyn will follow. The fact that Danny approaches Carson and says like, I don't want Carolyn in on this plan. I don't want Jam Jam in on this plan. It seems like she is making good relationships, but the fact that she initially, from Danny's perspective, who was like one of the big power players in this move, wanted to initially exclude her, I don't know what that says about her position in the Three Stooges is great. It's still a big question mark with everybody else. Jam Jam and Carson, especially through this vote, I'm getting a better sense as to like, A, where they're positioned, and B, who they're close with. Carolyn's still a little bit of a question mark. I don't want to discount her game by being like, well, she's not making clearly as strong connections as Jam Jam, because I would imagine that's not the case. But if I look at the small bits of information I got over the course of this episode, I'm going to knock her down a peg here. I think it's obviously a move that benefits the Three Stooges in many ways, but I think she benefits probably the least from it when push comes to shove. So I'm going to go with 4 here.
Okay, 4 dice. I absolutely agree with everything you said. I do hope that the discounting is in her favor, is a little bit of the underestimating that she can maybe crawl out of towards the end. But yeah, that is to be seen. The audience also gave her 4 dice, so she is going to average out with 4 dice today.
Okay, not too bad.
Looking good. Well, next up is, I think, the leader of the Three Stooges, Mr. Carson. A little sick this episode. Mike, start us off with Carson.
Well, if I rated his immune system, it would probably be a 1. But no, I'm going to the other end of the scale. Let me just put it out right here, right now. He's getting the full 5 from me. It's interesting you say the leader of the Three Stooges. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think from a strategic perspective, he's shown to us as like that talking head. I'm still always taking these things with a grain of salt as to like, well, is it because Carson's the best brain of the 3, and so that's why we're showing him consistently saying it? Because yeah, it seems like from our perspective, he's the one that's consistently vocalizing like what the Three Stooges should be doing and how they need to work together. Even outside of that, it cannot be denied the excellent position Carson is in. Look no further that this is like, again, we call this the first genuine merge vote of the season, right? Just given all the wonkiness of the past couple of episodes. And now we really got to see, as I mentioned before, where people stand. And Carson, I think, stood in a very good spot. Ratu is bringing him in on the plans as if he is one of them. And Brandon, said in his exit press that Carson really did a good job of selling Tika's a disaster. It's a sinking ship. I'm a rat moving over to this nice luxury liner. Please take me in. And so we have that side of things, which allows them to be this perfect mole to still blend in and vote with the Ratus. So just in case the inevitable, idle advantage shenanigans come about and he needs to scout out between Kane and Lauren and Jamie, like everything that's going on there, he's still actively included in those conversations because as far as they're concerned, he was in the dark as much as they were. On top of that, I really look at the fact that, again, I mentioned that scene before where Danny says, oh, I don't want Carolyn in on this. Danny goes specifically to Carson to say, okay, I want it to be me, Heidi, Franny, you. Let's keep this small. Why? Why is that the case? It's not a dynamic we have seen yet. These two guys haven't met until 2 days ago. I'm not sure why Danny felt, okay, Carson has to be the guy, especially if he is being perceived as like someone who is Ratu strong. But I'm taking that as a sign of like, okay, is Carson in good with Sokka as well? It's in a very different direction, but in a EW deleted scene, which talks about more about his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, like Franny is comforting him and crying over him as he's breaking down. He has somehow made really personal connections with all 3 sides of this tribal triangle. And I can't think of anyone else in this season who has done this so far. Jamie might claim that she is the MVP. Right now, I think it's Carson. I think just with the position he's in and also having the head for a game right now, maybe all that puke cleared his head to be able to see the path forward, or at least a path for the time being. I'm not sure how much this, pendulum strategy swinging back and forth between alliances is really going to pay off in the end. I think you got to eventually like stick to a side at a certain point, find a group and go with it. But at the moment, he has a rock solid 3 and is part of a couple of different rock solid other groups. I think he is far and away the winner of this episode. And if you ask me like who positionally is most likely to make their way to the final 3 and maybe win, my money's on Carson right now.
I agree so much. Let's leave the 5 dice here because he absolutely gets it. He is, I felt like he was in a good spot and working this middle well, but it wasn't until this episode that I realized how good it was, because Brandon thought he was a Ratu, and that I was like, wait, what? Brandon's including him as a Ratu? He convinced them so well. But
Mm-hmm.
he was about to go on Tika. He was Bonham. Oh no, that he was with them. Brandon assumed he was voting along with them. And then to your point, Danny doesn't want to include all of Tika. He's not asking for everybody's vote, but he's going to Carson. Why? Because I think he is the most trusted and most liked person out there that people feel comfortable talking to, feel comfortable working with, discussing votes, pulling in. I can't believe how well he is positioned. And we know he's a comp threat. Like, he can win some stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but actually being sick this episode takes a little bit of that threat away. So
Mm-hmm.
as stinky as it is to be sick, I was like, good for you. All of a sudden you look a little weaker. You're not nearly as threatening. If someone really sat down and thought about it, they could be worried about him, but I don't think they are at this moment. I agree with you. The way he played the vote is perfect. He did not show anybody what side he was on. It looks like he was with
Yeah.
Ratu. Okay, great. No one turns against him over there. But I do think that was discussed with Danny and stuff, so it's not hurting him. I was a little worried when he was like, "Oh, I don't know," and then he gave Danny the information that they do know. Jam Jam does know about it. Heidi revealed your idol. I was worried that this
Mm.
wasn't good for him to just spill, but I think ultimately it was fine. It
Mm-hmm.
worked for them to be able to figure out exactly how to vote and protect himself. And I think it also plays into his vibe of like, I'm just being honest. Oh, I'm just telling you. Oh no, they do know. Oh, Heidi
Mm.
told him. It doesn't seem like he's spilling dirt. It doesn't seem like he's blaming Heidi at all. He's just honestly being open with you like a good ally would. And I
Mm.
love that for him. So agreed. 5 dice
Yeah.
for me.
And what's interesting is, to your point, like, there has to be something social there. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that we haven't gotten that from his confessionals. I guess it's tough because the social game is just so hard to talk about unless you are like a Jam Jam who is providing all these one-liners and you're seeing people laugh about it. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because Carson has been the big like strat head for this season, in my opinion, where we keep getting all this game confessionals from him to the point where people are calling him a game bot. But like, clearly people like him enough to
Mm-hmm.
want to work with him, all these people. So I guess there's something there that I wouldn't say we're not seeing, because like I can see that a little bit of that charm happening. Less so, I think, this episode, just given the illness of it all. But it's interesting they
Mm-hmm.
haven't really focused on that, and more so him just really, objectively talking down things from a game perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. He might not be like TV gold like Jam Jam.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to have that. We get to have Carolyn like entertain us while
Mm-hmm.
Carson's just being the cool kid out there. The audience, they were a little less, it's an average. So they gave him 4 dice, but he is going to average out with all of us at 5 dice. So
Nice.
way to go, Carson. Who is next? Mr. Danny is up
Mm.
next.
Yeah, this is a big one. I think this was like the biggest discussion point, I believe, of this episode, right? Is, did Danny do the right thing?
Did he? I am of the mindset that he did do the right thing.
Mm.
I think that he's already someone that you might look at as a target that you want to get out. Um, Even though his name hasn't been like super heavy in everybody's mouth, I'm sure they're eyeing him. And I know that this idol play makes you eye him a little bit more. He is now front and center, especially if we're going to keep Ahsoka Ratu war going. But he just lost Matt and is really only down to Heidi as his number one or
Mm-hmm.
closest ally. I don't think Danny can afford to lose Franny at this point. Like, we still have plenty of people in the game. He needs numbers. Now, I could argue that Brandon was a good shield for him. Not sure that Brandon was the right person to go out for his game, but I do feel like the way he played the idol was the right way for him. So I am going to reward him with 4 dice
Yeah,
today,
I have
Mike.
I have gone so back and forth about this. My stomach feels unsettled, much like Danny's during that challenge, because this is one of those things where like every argument can be presented with a counter
Sure.
argument. Like you said, oh, getting rid of Brandon was bad because he could be a meat shield. I mean, theoretically, one of the reasons why Franny is targeted by the Rat Tubes is because she's pretty dang good at these challenges as well. There's a chance that if he does proceed forward with Franny, that Franny could also be someone that he could easily put in front of him. And also, he's no
Mhm.
slouch as well in challenges. He almost won over Lauren there. There's so much stuff to talk about here, right? Because basically, the choice comes down to it said it doesn't come down to 2 things. It's very multifaceted because it's okay, do you play the idol on Franny and lose Brandon? Do you not play the idol on Franny and let her go? Do you try not play the idol but try to get Jam Jam and Carson to vote with you to just create that 6-4 majority so you don't need the idol? I know the latter one would be the most perfect. It feels a little ticky tack for me. And I think for Danny, especially, I do feel bad to a certain extent that, like, yes, he does offer to Heidi, okay, I'll play this idol on Franny. I don't think he intended for the info to get out the way it did. After it did, I think if Danny were then to say, no, can we all vote together because I don't want to use my idol? That looks like such a dick move. You look
Yes.
incredibly selfish if you're like, Franny, I really want you to stay. I'm not going to use my idol on you, though. I'm so
Mm-mm.
sorry. Like, that is a really, really tough thing to look someone in the face and do. So I think that that choice was unfortunately eliminated, which also gave a lot of great clearance for Carson and Jam Jam to be like, okay, great. So he's going to, either use the idol or not. So I can vote with Ratu no matter what. So then it comes down to saving Franny or not. Essentially, keeping what you hope is an ally around, though, Franny is certainly a smart person. There's a chance that she doesn't need to necessarily stick with you until the end just based on this loyalty. Or do you keep your idol? Maybe the Sokas get winnowed down further, but between possible immunity wins and your idol, Terry Dietz style, like you're able to keep yourself safe. I think I am edging towards agreeing with the move at this moment. I could be persuaded otherwise, but to me, those possibilities I talked through with if you lose Franny but keep the idol are just a steeper mountain to climb, in my opinion. I'd rather have another body sitting next to me on the beach that I can at least reasonably count on, bounce ideas off of, or at least feel a little bit loyal to me because I saved their Tookus, as opposed to okay, great. Well, Franny's gone. At least I have an idol. But now I have to like do all these things. Not only that, now the information has gotten out that I have an idol. If they have been targeting Lauren for the past umpteenth rounds because she has an extra vote, what the hell do you think is going to happen to you, dude, once they find out you have an idol? So I think it was a nice thing to do to like get that not off his back because it's a powerful totem, but certainly like not get targeted because of it. There's certainly an argument that like all eyes are on him, but right now at least he doesn't have an idol, even though he'll go looking for one next time. He's able to make a move that is entirely his, right? He's the one that can say, I single-handedly saved Franny. I toppled the Ratu majority, even though they weren't a majority. So there are definitely downsides to his move. And I think
Mhm.
looking forward, we'll see, right? Like, how much was it going to be Ratu versus Soka? If it
Mhm.
was, then it's a good thing because then he has really broken this seemingly impenetrable alliance wide open and saved himself. Otherwise, he would have gotten picked off. If it wasn't, and Brandon really was intending to take him to the end, was this a necessary move? It's tough to take the temperature of right now because, again, we have such limited information to go off on.
Mhm.
So maybe it's me riding the adrenaline high of this episode. I will veer positive as well and give him the 4.
The 4 dice. All right. Well, Danny, sir, you got 4 from the audience as well. So you're going to average out with 4 dice. Maybe there's an extra dice in there for your farts. Not from me, but maybe from someone else. Yeah. we will see. We will see what happens with Danny's game. That's one that's hard to predict.
Hmm.
You know, can't quite tell. Okay, Miss Franny.
Yes.
Franny lost her man. Had a tough time at the start here. Mike, how's Franny doing?
Franny's doing well. It was obviously not the best bounce back episode for her, considering that as soon as they get back to the beach, she is being targeted.
Yeah.
And in a different world where the Three Stooges decide to side with Ratu, maybe they feel Franny is too threatening. They're going to finish off the 1-2 punch of the Frankenship. She's as good as gone. But lo and behold, she is spared. She is saved. She has at least one more day in the game, which is what you need. So I definitely give her commendations for that. So like I said, I'm going to start at like the 5 and work down. I
Mm-hmm.
think what is taking me down is the fact, though, that she was targeted.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of things behind that. You know, if the Ratu stick together next episode, maybe part of them is going to be like, well, we're going to vote against Danny. But I'm wondering, is Franny going to become like the Ricard of Survivor 44, where, yes, her name was thrown out there and was eventually dispatched, but then people might just keep going back to that well of voting for Franny over and over again because they'll say, look at her story. She lost match. She got saved by an idol. She's been winning challenges. She's so smart. Do we really want to keep her around? You know, I don't think it was a good thing that she was targeted so quickly after
Yeah.
Matt. And I guess part of that might be the good gamesmanship on the Ratus, but part of it is usually in these power couple situations, the other person who survives is able to like slip under the radar and sneak through just because people take half measures out there. They don't necessarily finish their punches. The fact that they were looking at her, and not even based on the Matt thing entirely, but because of how she was able to prove her mettle as recently as last challenge, and she's been
Mm-hmm.
so impressive in challenges so far, I think that's going to be really tough for her to shake. So, though she survived and, you
Mm-hmm.
know, was able to really get some composure going in the midst of like a really emotionally draining situation,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go the middle road here. I'm going to give her the 3 just because I'm so happy that she survived and, you know, did not end up following Matt to Ponderosa, though maybe Matt wished that was the case so they could get some alone time together.
Yeah.
But I do fear that this is only the beginning of her becoming the target of not only now the Ratu minority, but possibly something the rest of the tribe could come around on eventually.
Yes, I agree with you about 3 dice. It's because it's a little yes and no's with her, a little highs and lows. I was surprised that she was the target. I was
Mm.
actually at first questioning. I was like, Ratus, are y'all dumb? Why are you questioning Franny? She just de-threatened herself by losing her other half. Like, what's going on? But Brandon reminded me, she's a challenge beast. Like, she
Yeah.
has already proven
She
herself.
just beat his butt in the last challenge.
He remembers very clearly that
Yeah.
she's good at challenges and she's a smart game player. So I think she's being targeted, which is, you know, lose dice for that, but gain dice because it's you are good at this game. So I'm back to the middle here.
Mm.
You know, she was saved. So her social game is good enough for an ally to use an idol on her. Love that for her. But then I thought if Danny didn't have an idol, if there was no idol there to save her, would she have been able to save herself? And I
Mm.
don't know who she was going to be able to convince to keep her. So that is why I agree with you. Middle here, 3 dice for
Yeah.
Franny.
It is interesting from an edit perspective, to your point. A lot of the post-challenge strat chat was like Heidi and Danny doing the
Mm-hmm.
legwork for the
Mm-hmm.
Sokas, right? I do find it really interesting that the only scene we get of Franny is like Danny approaching her and her saying, I feel like it's coalescing around me. And he goes, yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Good news, I'm playing the idol on you. I don't know, was she in like an emotional state where she felt like she couldn't? Was she trying to purposely try to fade into the background, in which case she was unsuccessful? Because she certainly has like the skills to be able to strategize. I just find
Mm-hmm.
it interesting how it seemed like from our perspective, Heidi and Danny were the ones to like swoop and shield her, as opposed to her knowing things were going around her, and as a result was starting to wheel and deal and try and save herself.
Yeah, exactly. And you make a good point. We don't know. We only know what the edit shows us. But Megan in the chat says, give Franny points for, she wasn't an emotional wreck making things worse, which is good because we have seen that. But yeah, I have to really give the credit to Danny and Heidi in this situation. The audience gave her a 3 as well. So 3 dice across the board for you there, friends. Okay. The other person running this vote, Miss Heidi. All right, I had to be real hard on Heidi last week. I don't like the way that she handled that advantage. Oh, now, Mike, do you know, was she forced to use this advantage last week?
I wouldn't say forced, but encouraged, I feel like is implied. When I feel like as a Survivor player, when you get a parchment that is like, this must be used tonight, I don't think it's like you have to do it, or we'll take away your stipend money. But I think in a game where you are consistently trying to like come up with things you can talk about in a day 26 scenario, that like this is her rare opportunity to make an independent decision that she and only she has control of. So it's natural that she would want to do something with it, right? It's like when people play idols at the final 5, even when they know they're safe. Like, it's something you can visibly say, this is what I had, this is what my talents got me, this is how I used it. Now, my question for you is that, like, if you had the chance to smash the hourglass, go back a week, now hearing Heidi vocalize why she did what she did, would you have graded her higher?
Well, maybe I haven't heard everything, because no.
Okay. No, I'm just talking about in the beginning of the episode when she says basically like, I felt like the way things were going with Ratu, yeah, we could have like used Lauren's extra vote up, but basically I knew Matt was screwed. And so I felt like this would be the way to not make waves with anybody and try to, do the least amount of damage control when I get back to camp.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but she was, I say don't use it. Like, I feel like it was not good for her game. And she had to circle back with Jam Jam. She had to do damage control. Yeah, there was no way to save Matt. Mathematically, it wasn't going to happen. So definitely don't try any fancy footwork. But making Lauren and saying publicly Jam Jam's name, it just didn't feel like that was good for her. Jam Jam can come back against her at any time and use that. I didn't love that for her game. But this week, she's getting more dice because she showed me she's back in it. She's got her head in the game. She was working really hard to make sure Ratu went out, right? She nodded along at first. Sure. Vote out Franny. Right. And then she was like, no, we're not going to do that. Let's make something happen. So I really appreciate the work she did. I don't know that she needed to reveal Danny's idol. Because if Danny's really going, I mean, she says, hey, let's do this. Danny says, okay, great. Here, I have an idol. Let's play it on Franny. Done. End of story. Great. Go paint your flag. We're good to go. It got real messy because she revealed information. She didn't need their votes, right?
Yeah.
She didn't need them. So I want to reward her, but I can't completely reward her as like incredible. So I'm going to give her 4.
I went with the same as well. And it's interesting comparing her to Danny, both of which we gave 4, because I would say this vote going through with this move definitely incentivized Heidi more than it did Danny, right? We know about Danny's connection to Brandon. I talked about how Danny certainly, I think, had more outs should he have let Franny go than Heidi. It seems like we've seen like Heidi have dashes of conversations with people, but not in a way that we've seen Danny do. So I have no idea where she would stand with the Ratu Alliance. If Franny goes here, is Heidi the next to go? I'm not entirely sure. So it seemed like this was something she felt like she had to do. And that feels like more of a case maybe than someone like Danny. So I will give her a lot of credit there. I'll give her credit from at least an edited perspective that she seemed to be the one to really put the wheels in motion here, that she certainly served as the go-between with all these factions. And at the end of the day, she got what she wanted done. She was the one that threw Brandon's name out there. We'll see next week if and we can talk about this when we get to the Ratu people as well, if we feel like that was the person to target. But she got what she wanted accomplished, which is like fantastic. She actually, ironically enough, she had the single-handed advantage last week, couldn't do anything with it. Now with
Mhm.
just like whipping votes, she was able to make what she wanted happen. That's the fun thing that happens sometimes with Survivor. So I agree. High commendations for that. I also agree that telling Carson and Jam Jam about the idol is not a great look. I could see it from a certain perspective, right? Like, if you feel they are on the fence about working with you, and you say, okay, let me try to like reveal some Soka secrets here to make it feel like, okay, this is not Soka versus Tika. These are the
Mhm.
misfits. We share everything. We all work together. I could see it. The pitch wasn't good.
Yeah.
Starting the approach with, I probably shouldn't tell you this, you have passed the point of no return. If you stop yourself, people are going to lean in, especially like, a nosy SOB like Jam Jam and be like, okay, what? What is it? You
Uh-huh.
have to tell me
Uh-huh.
now. And then if you go ahead with it, like, what are you saying there? You're not saying, oh, this is information that we all felt we should share with you that you wanted to know. You're saying, like, yeah, technically I shouldn't be doing this, but I guess you should know. Like, it really didn't feel like, honestly, any positives came out of that conversation. It essentially incentivized Carson and Jam Jam to not need to join up with them with the vote, which then could
Yeah.
have saved Danny's idol. And in fact, when the information comes back to Danny, in another world, could have caused him to hoard his idol or play it for himself
Yeah.
instead, which would have then doomed Franny. So it was, you know, it's a little bit with Heidi of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. And
Mhm.
listen, let me just say, I'm so happy we are seeing her. This has
Yes.
been her coming out party for the past 2
Mhm.
episodes. No matter what the quality of gameplay, I'm so happy to see her. She and Lauren kind of felt like the 2 last missing pieces of the puzzle of Survivor 44, where we just didn't know them whatsoever in the pre-merge. And I love the fact that she has a head about her and is at least like willing to get down there and make moves and think through things. There just
Mhm.
will be a couple moments where maybe that foot goes into mouth. But for the
Yeah.
most part, the taste was good. So 4 for me.
Yes. To that point, though, Chantele and I talk a bit about this new era editing.
Mm.
It seems that the winners of this new era do not surface in the edit until about this time, until
Mm.
about the merge time is when we all of a sudden see the
Yeah.
Ericas, right? And so, pre-merge, we were like, who are we missing? We're missing Heidi and Lauren. And then boom, who shows up in the edit these last couple of episodes? Heidi and Lauren. So I have my eye on these two ladies to see, are they the end game here? Are they it?
That's a really valid point. And look no further than last season with Gabler. This episode last season that featured this challenge was Gabler's like biggest episode, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Because not only was this, him winning immunity and doing the this minute is dedicated to stuff, but if you recall, that was the first episode with the introduction of the Alligabler, where he made this
Mhm.
move on Ellie, and then he says, okay, now I'm gonna dip back under so nobody will suspect me, and then I'll pop up camouflaged. And lo and behold, that was like the thing that hooked in so many jurors as a narrative to give him $1 million at the end of the day. So I agree. I'm not discounting Heidi out whatsoever based on the
Mm-mm.
pre-merge. We know from the Erica of it all, right? Like when a tribe doesn't go to tribal council in the pre-merge, especially in the new era where there are 3 tribes, like they're just not going to get a lot of airtime. And if you look on
Right.
Soka, where you had Matt and Franny, who were, Matt and Franny together, when you had Danny, who was kind of bogarting all of the advantages, you had Josh, who only really popped once he started moving over to Tika. Like, yeah, it kind of makes sense that you go a bit invisible, unfortunately, just due to the fact that you weren't involved in kind of the major storylines happening on your tribe pre-merge.
Right. Exactly. Well, audience gave Heidi 4 dice as well. So 4 dice across the board. Okay. Now we get into some Ratus here.
Yeah, we get like a 1, 2, 3 of Ratus. It's so nice that they're right next to each other.
Jamie, Jamie, Jamie. She's had an interesting edit as well, right? It's a little terrifying at some points because it's so it's slightly delusional. I won't say so delusional, but it's slightly delusional to the point that I am fearful every tribal she is going to stand up and play that fake one in a very proud and big moment. I feel like that is what we're building up to. Not there yet, but this episode, I did not see her do any work. I didn't see her circle back and try to split the votes or make sure anyone was voting any certain way. And she lost an important ally. So, unfortunately, I am giving out 2 dice to Jamie.
Yeah, this is honestly maybe the toughest one for me because Jamie was probably the person we saw the least in this episode, outside of, her talking about how on the inside she's just a constant mess and is just having a great job of doing the game face the entire time. We don't really know her position within the Rat2 Alliance. Brandon told me that he and Jamie were never really on the same page, that they basically worked together because of the similar buff color, but she was never someone that he was incredibly keen on working with. But I also don't know what her relationships are with anybody else. She had that stuff with Soka, but it seemed like when Matt had expressed last week that, like, Jamie was clearly lying to them about stuff on Rat2, so, like, that trust was never there. It seems like, she is somebody who is the rare case of, like, refusing to commit herself to one side, and as a result is kind of like a friend to none, where I can't really find anyone that she's particularly close with. That might be by proxy of the edit, or it might be just if she's, like, having conversations where she's just doing double talk the entire time. That's just not garnering a lot of trust with anybody. So that being said, she obviously, survived this vote, which helps. She wasn't Brandon in that way. It's a tough thing as well.
It didn't seem like her name came up.
Yeah, her name didn't come up, though they do mention in this episode, right, that there is a rumor that Jamie has an idol. So that might be a reason why. Though, if that's also the reason why, like, again, they were throwing all these votes onto Lauren because they thought she might have the extra vote. Why are they not voting for Jamie if they think she has an idol?
Yeah.
I'll go with... Nah, I'm gonna go with the 1 here. I'm gonna give Jamie the 1. These Rat2s deserve the 1 for me, for just,
it wasn't pretty this episode.
I know things were not in their direction as we spoke about beforehand, but I think just, like, not at least trying to go through and try to make a split vote plan does seem like kind of adding insult to injury at the end of the day, where you would have lost either way, but you were kind of caught sleeping at this point. Like, it seemed like we got so much from Rat2 in the beginning of this episode of, like, we're on top, look what we're able to do, and it all just amounted to naught. And I'm really intrigued to see where things go from here. If it is so big that, like, these other 3 get picked off, 1, 2, 3, Jamie could be the next one, due in part because of, like, this phantom idol that's hanging above her.
Yeah. Yes, we'll talk more because we have more of them coming here.
Exactly.
The audience, however, did give her 2 dice, so she is going to average out with 2. But that just takes us to another one.
Another one.
Kane. Mike, talk to me about Kane, because he's the one who said Rat2's going to win.
Yeah. Kane, what are you doing? You're such a fan of this show. The moment you even put any combination of these words within the same soundbite, that the editors will, like, stitch it together to make it seem like you're cocky. The fact that he said that completely unbroken knows he got cocky, kid. And as a result, his Death Star blew up. Let's see if he can build another one. I go back and forth about, honestly, 1 or 2 for this one, because you could say, like, what's the difference between Jamie and Kane? I think my differences are... 1, I think Kane didn't have as much of a target on him as Jamie now, considering that Jamie does have this idol around her. And it does seem like he is making some bonds. He made this bond with Carson before, it seems. It seems like there are some outs for him. On top of that, this ends up working out of the Rat2s, the best for Kane. And that we know, and Brandon has expressed to us, how Kane was still on his shit list based on that very first vote. He said that Kane was never going to be in his endgame plans. So again, if it ends up being Soka versus Rat2 moving forward, of course, it sucks to lose a number. This is going to screw Kane over. If not, Soka might have done Kane the biggest favor in getting rid of like the one person left that was guaranteed not to take him to the end. That to me is going to bump him up a skosh to a 2.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 2 dice for Kane. Yeah, he part of me keeps thinking he has connections with Carson. I feel like that was hinted at, even though I guess we don't fully know.
It happened with the Matthew stuff, right? Back on Rat 2, that
Right.
like they were both approaching it from different angles.
Yeah, it seemed like Kane kept going back to Brandon and really was wanting to be Ratu strong. But I feel like he can team up. Like Carson can pull him in. We can have a bit of a nerd army here. So I do like what you're saying, that this might actually have benefited him. But at the end of the day, sloppy vote. He did nothing to help this. He lost a number and he was cocky about it. So I'm going to give him 2 dice as well. Really keep waiting to see something wonderful from Kane. And I just haven't seen it yet. Oh,
He's fun though. I love his. Listen,
yes.
I vibe with his references. I'm very much on the same
Yes.
wavelength with him, so I can understand why some people are like cringe. All he talks about is Star Wars and D&D, and I'm like just staring at myself in the mirror, like, is that all you are, Mike Bloom? So I cannot cast any sort of blame at him.
No, I agree. I want him to like be a bigger character. I want him in the show because he does seem so fun and entertaining, and his preseason stuff was like hilarious.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we just haven't really gotten, any great stuff besides his nerdy references.
I don't know. Maybe this could be like a Franny thing for him, right? Where now he's like, okay, this is Kane's revenge arc. Let me proceed forward. And like, maybe with Brandon was far from his mat, but maybe if he feels his alliance is cut down, then maybe they'll underestimate him and he can wiggle his way through the cracks.
Absolutely. The audience gave him 2 dice, so he is going to average out at 2 dice here. Lauren, Miss Immunity winner. Well, I have to give you extra dice, or at least 1 die for winning immunity. That is great. Good for you. It was adorable.
Yeah.
She was talking as if she didn't have confidence about her challenge skills, feeling weak, but she pulled it out and didn't even know where to stand, and it was great. It was adorable. I can't give her a 5 though, because
imagine
she
1 immunity, 5.
I would love to, but she was a part of this sloppy plan, and she did lose her number 1 ally. We know that Brandon was there for her. If Brandon was going to end up in the finals, she was going to end up in the finals. This is really going to hurt her game. She still has an extra vote, so maybe that is helpful. So I am going to give her 4.
Wow.
But mostly because she won immunity.
Yeah, I was going to say, dang. I gave her some bonus cred for winning immunity. I gave her a 2 with that bonus cred. I mean, listen, I can't separate her that much from the other Ratus, considering that she was not only a part of this plan. To your point, she was working right there alongside Brandon, like seemed to be really spearheading this idea of, we'll pile it onto Franny. Don't worry about it. She has this wild scene in the beginning of the episode where she's sitting there with Carolyn and tells her to her face, like, I don't know we know each other that well, but I think we should work together. Like,
I think you should be trying to work with me.
I really hope that's taken out of context, because just the audacity to say that to somebody's face. Maybe that just speaks to like how people feel about Carolyn, which is like, let me tell you how to play your game for you. Right. But still, like, even if you think the person is the worst player in Survivor, do not talk to somebody like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it does seem like, I also think there's a world where if she doesn't win immunity, that she's the one who gets these votes, not Brandon. Danny talks about wanting to target her. This happened, in the beginning of last episode as well, where Lauren has this extra vote. It's public knowledge. We want to get rid of her. When they thought they could finagle the numbers with this control of vote advantage, they were going for Lauren. Like, up until she became immune, I think Lauren was the kind of consensus target from the non-Ratu people. And so I do give her kudos, hence the 2, for winning immunity and protecting herself. But
Yeah.
as I spoke about with Franny, is it a good thing that she probably would have gone if she didn't win immunity? I don't think so. So I'm glad that she still has at least like something in her pocket. It's not Brandon, but it is an extra vote. But I would not be surprised in the least if she is the next one to go, considering how much she has been served up as a target from Ratu. If she doesn't win immunity here, I could easily see them taking the shot here, especially now them pulling the Franny logic of, look at her in challenges. Do we really want to
Mhm.
keep her in the game? I think if we're guessing who the next person booted is going to be, I would put like 8 out of 10 of my chips on Lauren
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. She has been discussed in multiple votes. If she had not saved herself this episode, I have to imagine she would have been at least one of the names discussed. The audience gave her 3, so she is going to average out at 3 dice there.
Look at the
Middle
diversity. 2,
of the
3,
row.
4.
Yeah, that was the most diverse one, I think, there. All right, wrapping it up here. The man, the myth, the legend, Jam Jam. Mike, he's so entertaining, but how do you feel about his gameplay?
This was a great episode for Jam Jam as well. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was not vulnerable here. He thought he was for a second when everyone was washing mud off and not talking with him, but all it took was just stepping out of the water, and they came to him with this plan of, okay, let's vote for Franny. He's like, wait, Franny? That doesn't contain the letters YAM. Okay, great. Fantastic. I'll work with you. Yeah, Jam Jam is Jam's a sneaky little kitty, much like the ones on his shirt. I really like his positioning in this vote. The fact that he is also able to vote with the Ratus here. It wasn't as like explicit as Carson in being included in on the vote, but
Yeah.
Jam Jam, I think, felt in a bit of a jam with this idea of feeling like he owed something to Brandon and the Ratus after they had like the very explicit opportunity to get rid of him, and they didn't. And so I do think, like, people might say, oh, that's honesty and loyalty. You don't need to do that in Survivor. Like, it's less that to me, and it's more so the social aspect. It's this idea of, in a game like Survivor, people are going to feel pretty damn bad if you extend to them an olive branch and then you take it, and then the next thing you do is snap it and say, nope, I don't need it anymore. That would just be really, really sucky. So the fact that
Right.
Jam Jam is given this opportunity to mask his intentions, that he did want Brandon out. If he didn't, he had a very easy thing to do, which was to tell them, hey, Danny has an idol. Now, what I think is interesting, as we mentioned before, is that he floated the idea out. I would imagine this was before that he found out about Danny's idol. That's my assumption, and that he was doing it, A, to like spread shit and chaos, because that's Jam Jam to a certain extent, but also at the same time, like, guarantee for the umpteenth time that he's not a target by essentially pitting Danny and Brandon against each other, which I think is a smart idea. So he was able to like still make Brandon feel fairly good about their relationship and feel very good considering that he was voting alongside them. And I don't think it's anything that should be against him. It's yet another feather in his cap of like, look at what I survived here. I'm not even in the line of fire like I have been the past several times. It's a feather in his cap to his social relationships that he is able to nurture one, even though he knows he's sending Brandon to jury effectively. He's able to kind of quote unquote keep this sort of like deal of, hey, you kept me, so I'm going to work with you. I'm giving Jam Jam the full 5. I think that if I were to like tier the 5s, I think I would put him lower than Carson, because again, I think Carson still has the best relationships with everybody across the board. It seems everyone seems to love Jam Jam, and it's great that Heidi was able to keep him to like really bring him on board into things. I think that that's a very essential relationship that we'll look at down the line. But I think that Carson just has more like explicitly good deals, I think, going on. Everyone feels good about Jam Jam. There's the reason why he hasn't gone so far. So he has been able to kind of like slip under that. I'm kind of waiting to see, when does Jam Jam be able to say, all right, I'm making a move, I'm doing this thing. You don't necessarily have to as a Survivor winner, but still really great week for him. He was able to essentially have his cake and eat it too here in being a part of the Misfits, yet still having the ability to jump over to the Ratus should, the worst case scenario happen.
Interesting. I would love to give him that many dice. He
Uh-huh.
is so entertaining, so enjoyable. And yeah, even though he has been, gosh, just like clawing up from the bottom, right? His name has been out there so much. He was just a default vote here and
Yeah,
there.
he said what? That there's been 10 tribal councils and he's been to 8 of them?
Right? It's been hard for him, but because of his social game, it's because of that, the way that he can make people laugh and make them feel comfortable, that they don't really want to vote him out. He's not really a target. And here we are, he's finally not even a target. But he was able to joke to Brandon's face of like, lie better to me than that. That's like cementing, you're not coming for me, right? And Brandon is like, yeah, no, I'm really not, because I think I've pulled you in, right? And then I think when I look at other people out there, I think a few of them feel like they've reeled Jam Jam in. And so he's in a decent spot, I think. And I agree that like Lauren is probably going to be the target over Jam Jam, although he might still be like a backup plan. So he voted well, not technically on the right side, but I do think he was on the right side of this. He planted the information with Brandon. We didn't get to see it, but I'm assuming it was in the same manner that he told Lauren, Matt and Danny threw out her name. It was just like beautifully planted of like, I don't know what's going on, but I am hearing your name come up
That's a
from
really
that
good point. Yeah, I
side.
love the way he pitches. Yeah, I'm just like
Yeah.
he's kind of like the gossip at the salon. Like, I heard this information. It may not be true, but like, I think you should probably know that your name got thrown out by somebody. I don't know. They
Exactly.
may not have the numbers, but I just thought I'd let you go off and spiral in a paranoid little mess while
Right.
I just kind of clean up the pieces.
Yeah, and I think wisely he doesn't reveal the idol. I don't know that that helps his game to reveal the idol. I think let it play out and just stay out of the forefront is probably good for his game. So I like a lot, but I can't go super high because I don't feel like he has the agency. I don't think he could next episode decide who's going. I don't think he's quite there. So I'm actually keeping him in middle here at 3 dice.
Oh, I like how towards the tail end here, we are just veering off wildly. We're those arrows that Franny was talking about, right? We met in the middle for 7 out of the 10, and then now we're just going in our all different directions.
That's how it goes sometimes. The audience gave him 3 dice, so he's going to average out at 4.
Okay.
Thanks to Mike Bloom there. So that gives us one person. Carson got the average of 5 dice. And then our lowest was Kane. He got 2 dice. That's our ins there. But interesting episode.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Was this your favorite episode of the season?
I don't know that it was. I feel like a couple episodes ago was my favorite.
It's tough. I think that episode you're talking about, episode 5, was the most fun. I still think that scene at the summit with Brandon and Danny and Carolyn was like an all-timer best scene of the season so far.
You're right.
But I think this one was probably like the best Survivor episode out of the group, and that like it had all the things. It had the challenge, it had the vote out, it had the strategizing. Whereas episode 5 was so much fun, but there is a little bit of like, well, nobody technically got voted out, so how do we feel about this? I know I'm on record in saying that like I personally do not need a tribal council to feel like it's a great episode of Survivor, but I feel like episode 8 felt like a more complete, typical episode of the show by comparison.
Yeah, it definitely felt like classic Survivor because we haven't had that too much. I mean, I guess early episodes, we do have the 3 tribes. Okay, that's fairly normal, but we had birdcage and stuff. Like this feels like one person's immune. We have a whole bunch of people at tribal to talk about it. We got a jury member over here making amazing hard eyes at Franny, by the
Mm-hmm.
way. That's too cute. I'm going to enjoy that for the rest of this season, as long as she's in the game.
Yeah, and that's the
Then,
thing as well. Actually, speaking of the birdcage, this is something that I tweeted out earlier today. So, Brandon's gone, Matt's gone, Danny
mhm.
used his idol. For all intents and purposes, like the remaining survivor of this entire birdcage twist that put 3 real idols and 3 fake idols into the game is Carolyn's that nobody knows about. Now, there is a wrinkle. There was a secret scene this week
Mhm.
where Kane accidentally finds an idol that Brandon had hidden his fake idol when they found out they were merging at the Ratu camp, being like, oh, somebody's going to stumble onto this, and Kane accidentally found it. I'm not sure if someone will find it, so there's still a chance that, like, Brandon's fake idol will live on, even if he does not in the game. But by and large, like, this birdcage quiz is kind of DOA for as much as we were talking how OP it was with like all the idols being found in the first 2 episodes and all these fake idols happening. I don't know. It led to interesting moments, but I do find it interesting that it hasn't really, it's not going to incorporate a lot into the end game at the end of the day.
But it did. Danny just used it perfectly. He
Yeah,
saved Franny.
but what I think is interesting is like usually, right, people like hang on to idols until, the latter stages that we're going to possibly enter the final 6 with like 2 idols at most, one of them maybe being from this birdcage. And it's just interesting that
Right.
like all of them were kind of expended, including the fake ones
Yeah.
throughout these like past 6 episodes. I wouldn't call it necessarily a failure of a twist. I still do not necessarily like the idea of like production created fake idols just because it feels a little too much like fooling the players who don't
Yeah.
know about it. But at the same time, like it seemed like when we talked about this episode, right, as like being the most pure survivor the season has been so far. That's a sign, right, of how the birds have kind of flown the coop out of the cage for the most part. Now
Yeah.
we can kind of move forward. Another idol will be brought in. Lauren still has her extra vote, and Carolyn still has her idol. But outside of that, there's not a lot more. Maybe we're going to get another like choose your champion advantage like we got from 43, but I am knocking on every wood in the freaking Fijian jungle to hope that they let things be relatively okay structure wise moving forward.
Right.
Now that we have not only the first like relatively pure vote of the season, but also that it ended in such a fun outcome.
Yeah, agreed. I love that we have a good secret idol out there. I love that we have a fake idol out there. And we don't need much more. That's fine. We have an extra vote, which I don't know. How much weight does an extra vote actually, like, I'm not sure she's going to be able to play it well. She might even go out this week. I don't know. But hopefully, it's nice to use an advantage to your advantage.
Exactly.
But it's hard. It's hard to make that happen. I want to say thank you to everybody in the chat for being here with us. And thank you to you, sir, Mike Bloom, for coming back another season and rating these players.
Yeah, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me aboard. I really, again, I think we picked a fun week. I think my brain would have been broken had you brought me on last week to try to rate these players considering all the circumstances around them. But it worked out great that we had, again, a very pure round of Survivor and a very pure set of rankings. We were able to consequently look at what happened with the stuff that we knew and rate accordingly.
Yes, and your favorite episode. So that worked out perfectly. Is there anything you need to tell the peoples? What should we look out for?
Oh, so much. By and large, I sort of put everything out there at a Mike Bloom type. And as Sarah puts out there, I am doing exit press for parade.com every week for Survivor 44. So you can check that out. Talk with Brandon this week. Got into some of the stuff that he filled both of us in on. I will also be doing another Survivor 44 podcast. Of course, my usual weekly podcast, the RHAP B&B with Liana Boris. This week, we're going to have Omer Zahir on, which should be very exciting. I'm sure Omer has some thoughts about, again, not only all the gameplay going on, but I think a lot of stuff about this season. I really want to ask him about the consecutive days of votes, how good or a bad thing that is. Omer's always such a great get. So all that's going on. Over on Post-Show Recaps, there is so much happening. I'm covering Barry. I'm covering Mrs. Davis. I just finished covering The Mandalorian and Star Trek Picard. I'm going to be talking Succession on a couple times this week. A bunch of other things in the hopper. If you like TV and if you are like me and Kane and you like to frame things through, quotes and references, chances are there's something for you on postshowrecaps.com, maybe even involving me. So all that, and I'm sure much more to come as we, veer into May and look at the flowers bloom.
Looking at the flowers of blooming with Mr. Mike Blue. Thank you so much, you guys. If you are watching this later, leave a comment, give us your ratings. Is anyone getting 1 or 5? Let us know if you agreed or disagreed. All of that. We want to know. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.